Due Process, awarded the 2005 New York Emmy for Societal Concerns Programming.
This is their law school, but they'll earn no degree. They won't call themselves Esquire or join the bar, but they've got more clients than they can handle. Here, almost everyone's got a case. Jailhouse lawyers, filling the gap. Up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, a private foundation focusing on New Jersey public policy issues. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.
They're not the toughest guys in state prison, but they may be among the most respected. They're the ones who spend their time lifting law books instead of pumping iron. The ones who've been known to get a sentence reduced or even get a conviction overturned. I'm Raymond Brown, and on this edition of Due Process, the jailhouse lawyer. Are they a nuisance in our already overburdened courts or an essential element in an unjust system? We'll take on those questions here in the studio, but first, Sandy King introduces us to one of New Jersey's most prolific jailhouse lawyers.
Raymond, after insisting on his innocence over more than 20 years in state prison, he is angry and arrogant and very smart. And if you have anything to do with criminal justice, you have probably gotten at least one of his letters. He'd been writing to me for years, so I finally went to see him at Northern State Prison, where I found a kind of lawyer without license and a far cry from those we have brought you in the past.
Why should this guy go to jail?
The iconoclast academic.
When it comes to somebody who's despicable and hateful and nobody else will take him, that's my job.
The lawyer as celebrity.
O.J. Simpson in a knit cap from 2 blocks away is still O.J. Simpson.
The civil servant public defender.
In light of the downgrade, we're requesting a cash bail of $250.
And even the ones who devote a legal lifetime to freeing the imprisoned innocent. Criminal defense lawyers.
That's a ridiculous coincidence.
The committed.
Witnesses lie, DNA doesn't.
The charismatic.
They're liars, they're murderers, they're manipulators, they're schemers, and they come out, hey, I'm full of unity.
We've met all types over the years here at Due Process, beginning with our own Raymond Brown, and earlier, his legendary dad. But there's one class of advocate on the criminal defense scene that we never see, don't know, and rarely even hear about.
Just an average Joe.
You didn't go to college?
No. But I have a master's degree in common sense.
Introducing the jailhouse lawyer. He may never appear in the courtroom. His name may not even make it to the brief. But for some of his fellow inmates, it is his work that makes all the difference.
But they never want to give the credit to the jailhouse lawyer, so I just, take a back seat and just let the issues speak for themselves.
Just ask Michael Howard. Forklift operator by day, preacher nights and Sundays, who says without the legal skills of Ronnie Long, he'd still be locked up with years left to go.
He sat down with me one day in the law library and he asked me to bring all my transcripts so he can read over them. And Ronnie really said that he could guarantee that he could get my case overturned. He might have asked me a few questions, but he did the work.
The kind of work he's done for scores of fellow inmates.
I know the feeling of winning, and I know that over and over and over and over and over again. I know that winning feeling.
And each win means a shortened sentence or an early trip home, like the one he got for Michael Howard.
Yeah, that should be 68 of them.
Convicted of intentional murder in what he insists was an accidental stabbing in a case of self-defense.
It was first-degree murder at first, until Ronnie, he's seen a lot of mistakes in my trial that he could get my case overturned.
So the word gets around, and people come to me and need help, and people really need help because the lawyers sell out.
It's the kind of story that spreads quickly through a prison, where the jailhouse lawyer may be the last and only source of legal help.
The number of those in prison far outstrips the legal resources to represent them. So the jailhouse lawyer, in a sense, is an answer to that. You know, it's not a perfect answer, is it? These are uneducated guys struggling to understand books that are sometimes over their heads, but it's part of the answer to it.
And Neil Mullen knows all about jailhouse lawyers. One of the best was his client and friend, James Landano. After serving 13 years for the murder of a cop, Landano, with years of Mullen's help, finally convinced a court that he was, in fact, innocent. And once he was released, Landano was hired as a paralegal by Mullen.
And then I was doing mostly civil litigation. So he was digesting deposition transcripts and keeping my files in order, and he did a wonderful job for the 9 years he was my paralegal.
But Landano, who died of a heart attack 3 years ago at 63, had started working cases years before inside this prison.
He was allowed a phone call to me at least once, sometimes twice a day. And probably 5 times out of 10, he was asking me about someone else's case. He was constantly helping people. He was very much a jailhouse lawyer in that tradition.
But Jimmy's own best client was himself. He first turned to the law books to help get himself free.
All I ever asked for was 12 jurors to pay attention to the facts.
Just like Ronnie Long, who's maintained for more than 20 years that he too is an innocent man, despite a verdict of guilty and the ultimate sentence.
I was convicted of capital murder, armed robbery, and weapons offenses, like 13 different charges. And I was sentenced to the death penalty. I spent about 5 years on death row.
He did get that death sentence reversed, but he's had less luck with his years of petitions and appeals, all based on his claims of innocence.
I know my reality is that I have to go another 7 years before I'm eligible to see a parole board.
So he settles for success on other inmates' cases. Michael Howard, he says, is just one of many.
I want to thank you, though, again.
D'Angelo Leverett is another. He's still locked up in Northern State Prison, but instead of looking at a lifetime here, he's now looking forward to a life outside.
What he was able to do is take what happened, my version of it, put it within them documents, which is hard, but he know how to address these things and bring it out.
Lucky for you.
Very lucky. I'm grateful.
So instead of having a 60-year sentence, he has a 30-year sentence, and he's up for parole anytime now.
Because of the work you did for him?
Yeah, because of the work I did for him.
When you see these guys wanting to help someone get out because they know that, man, you know, you shouldn't even be in prison, and they'll work with you, and that's a blessing to have them there.
There's a desperate need for lawyering, and the system can't provide it. So the jailhouse lawyer comes along, and instead of just pumping iron or doing push-ups in the courtyard, says, let me use my brain, let me read, let me do something with my life. And in all the jails I know and all the prisons I know, there are jailhouse lawyers.
What about the irony that you've been able to help all of these other people, but...
Can't help myself. That scares me because I never wanted to believe that was true. They say jailhouse lawyers can get everybody else out except themselves. And I never wanted to believe that, you know. But it is a strange irony, but it's okay. I could deal with it because I know my life is not being wasted, you know. And then, you know, somebody's going to come to my aid one day.
So what's in it for them? Well, there's prestige and some protection inside the prison. For Ronnie Long, there's also the thrill of the win. And there's always the hope that he'll get himself out. Long's appeals have been exhausted, so now he puts his hopes on a gubernatorial pardon. Though Dick Cody left office without granting his request for clemency, Long is not without supporters. Among them, Reverend Reginald Jackson, executive director of the Black Ministers Council, who believes Long's trial and conviction may have been seriously flawed.
And when we come back, we'll meet a man who did win his freedom with the help of legal counsel, a criminal defense attorney who's met his share of jailhouse lawyers in his work on innocence cases, and a former federal judge who saw his share of the voluminous filings that find their way to the federal courts from jailhouse lawyers. So stay with us.
What is jailhouse lawyers? I have no idea.
You know, I really don't have an idea.
Jailhouse lawyers? I wouldn't have no clue.
Lawyers who are appointed to people in jail, maybe?
There are people who are incarcerated who have studied an aspect of law and who dispense legal information as best as they understand it.
I believe jailhouse lawyers are lawyers that help you try to get out of jail.
My definition would be someone in jail that thinks they know the law and can represent themselves in court.
Lawyers, and they got locked up for one reason or another.
While they're in jail, they pick up a book, like any lawyer can in Seton Hall or Rutgers, and read, because they have access to the library or whatever. They counsel the other inmates inside prison.
Jailhouse lawyers.
You represent the inmates, prisoner, resident, or convicts that are in jail. They are called jailhouse lawyers.
But how useful to their fellow prisoners do these jailhouse lawyers tend to be? How do the courts tend to look at what they do? And what does the need for them say about the lack of traditional legal help for prison inmates? For some answers, we turn to Paul Castellero, whose criminal defense practice is dedicated largely to freeing the imprisoned innocent, often in conjunction with the Princeton-based Centurion Ministries, to Stephen Orlovsky, a former U.S. District Court judge and an expert on appellate litigation strategy. And with us from Newark, our old friend David Shepard. We began following his case 11 years ago, when he finally won his freedom through DNA proof after serving 12 years on a wrongful rape conviction. Welcome to all of you. Paul, let me start with you. We focused in that video on Ronnie Long because he's a person who's well known as a jailhouse lawyer. But in fact, he's not alone. We went out to the website of the Center for Constitutional Rights and found a Jailhouse Lawyer's Handbook, which is dedicated really to dealing with issues concerning prison conditions. But it reflects the fact that there is more than one jailhouse lawyer. Over your years going in and out of the prisons, have you met many guys who fashioned themselves jailhouse lawyers?
I've met many, and I think if you can go into any jail in the country, you'll find a good number of jailhouse lawyers. And it just speaks to the idea that they're not provided legal counsel once their appeals are done. And so the only way they can attack the system and attack their convictions is through the aid with jailhouse lawyers if they can't afford a lawyer.
Just let me clarify one thing. Once their first round of appeals are done, but they may still have other remedies, they no longer have legal
once
counsel.
their first, a lot of the work I do is post-conviction relief work, and post-conviction relief work, counsel is not provided. I mean, in New Jersey, sometimes courts will appoint a lawyer if they feel that the petition is meritorious, but as a routine matter, lawyers are not appointed. So the only way people that have lost all their appeals and been convicted can get back into the courts a lot of times is through the aid of a jailhouse lawyer. I mean, it just demonstrates the number of jailhouse lawyers across this country just demonstrates the crying need to provide lawyers for inmates in jail to help them, because many of them are there wrongfully.
Judge Orlovsky, when you sat as a judge, it meant that you sat in a system in which many men and women were in prison who had some remedies available to them, potentially at least the right to come to court, and would turn then to jailhouse lawyers. From your perspective on the bench and the attitudes of your colleagues on the bench, did they view the work of jailhouse lawyers as an asset or as a nuisance because of the number and perhaps the quality of work?
Well, there was certainly a recognition on my part that this was an underrepresented
legal population, that on post-conviction relief, for all intents and purposes, as Paul points out, legal counsel was not available. And so they provide a source of assistance for the desperate, for those.
We'll come back to that because I think you agree with Paul about the need, and we are going to come back. But what I wanted to do was from the point of view of a working judge who sees significant numbers of petitions come in and knows that a significant number are done by jailhouse lawyers, is there a perspective on the bench that, well, you know, a lot of these are just too numerous and shouldn't be here, or they're not done the way we'd like to see them done?
I generally could tell when there was a good jailhouse lawyer working a file, because the quality of the work would be much better than the average run of petitions that were filed. And some of them were pretty good. Some of them, based on they're anonymous, so you don't really know. Some of them, many of them are not, but some are actually very good, and they're committed, they're dedicated, and they have the time.
Have you heard your colleagues say, or your former colleagues say, that the sheer number of complaints and petitions generated by jailhouse lawyers is a difficulty for the system?
It is a difficulty because frequently, because they have so much time on their hands, they generate a lot of frivolous pleadings. But by the same token, occasionally you get a meritorious petition that's been prepared by a jailhouse lawyer, and that may even lead you to appoint counsel.
So we're going to come back to the cause of this, but let's talk to somebody who's directly experienced the other side of the system. David, everybody knows, certainly among due process viewers, that DNA issues were critical in your ultimately finding your freedom. But when you first were incarcerated, didn't you go to the library yourself in order to get introduced to the idea?
Oh yeah, I spent a lot of time in the law library. There, I learned a lot about DNA testing and the processes.
Now, you had no training as a lawyer or in any legally related job before you went in. Did anybody assist you when you first started your own research, or were you on your own?
No, the people that were already working in the law library, inmates already working in the law library, assisted me a great deal. It helped me navigate through the books and the periodicals and all the other legal information that was out there.
And many of them had to find their own way, as you did.
Right.
Now, going back to our video concerning jailhouse lawyers and Ronnie Long, I understand that you knew some people who benefited from his representation?
Yeah, I knew of a few people that mentioned him in passing, and when I was incarcerated, I mentioned him. And plus the fact that sometimes jailhouse lawyers, being a civilian clerk there, has an opportunity to call other prisons and ask questions of those guys. So a lot of times we would call down to Trenton and even Rahway and ask lawyers down there their opinion on something, and they would tell us which way to go or what to look up.
Now, to be admitted to the bar, you need 4 years of college, 3 years of law school, pass the bar exam, and then usually you have some time of being trained before you really step out as a lawyer, especially in appellate litigation. Was it your experience that jailhouse lawyers are maybe unfairly lumped together, and there are good ones and bad ones, and that the quality of work can vary considerably, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. The quality of work does vary considerably. But one of the things about jailhouse lawyers that's kind of unknown, I think, is that many of them come in uneducated. And
you don't mean just uneducated in the law. You mean
uneducated,
not well
just
read
uneducated, not well read, uneducated, have no education. In fact, took no interest in school at all. They get into jail and they get into these legal difficulties, and suddenly their interest is piqued because they have a self-interest, and they become they blossom as intellects in a sense, and they go on to help many people. One of the things that is really not appreciated about jailhouse lawyers is many times they will point a prisoner in the right direction with their attorney, or they'll make contact between the prisoner and attorney, and as a result of that contact, the freedom will be won for that particular inmate. And
have you heard even that some may ghostwrite or write drafts of briefs for lawyers?
What they do is I haven't heard that, but what they do is they do ghostwrite a lot of letters for inmates to their lawyers and to courts. And I mean, that's a big part of their business is kind of staying on top of the inmate's lawyer to keep the lawyer in check, to tell the lawyer that, hey, what about this issue, and to let the lawyer know that somebody's out there watching.
That's
and,
correct.
and they write those letters for the inmates. A lot of inmates can't do it.
Judge, did you sometimes see petitions, briefs, or letters that came across your bench or desk that you felt was the handiwork at some level of a jailhouse lawyer?
No question, because occasionally I would see a dramatic improvement in the quality of a letter or a petition that I was getting, and it couldn't have come from the same person in a short span of time. So because that person wasn't represented by counsel, I knew that he, in this case it was a male inmate, had access to a jailhouse lawyer who was assisting him. And some of the stuff was pretty good.
Now, let me ask you this question. If you get a brief from a lawyer and a point is not raised, your initial assumption has to be that the lawyer has some strategic reason for not raising that point. If you get a brief from a jailhouse lawyer, does the same assumption govern, or might you actually have to read more deeply and even yourself raise issues that you think might have just been missed by jailhouse lawyers?
I would typically read more deeply. Many times jailhouse lawyers, as Paul points out, can even point lawyers in the right direction, but I would scrutinize those kinds of things more carefully and probably do more work independently than I would do if the person were represented by a licensed attorney.
Now, David, both of the lawyers here have raised concerns that much of the need for jailhouse lawyers is prompted by inadequate lawyers available to men and women inside prison. Was that something that you were conscious of when you were doing time?
Oh yeah, it's that. It's also the way they pointed out. They write letters for individuals that don't know exactly how to read or can't comprehend. So we write letters for those individuals. We try to write letters to their lawyers, and if we see something, we try to point.
Did you do some of that yourself?
Yeah, I did a few myself at the time I was there.
Now, let me ask you this: how can we call our system just if people who are incarcerated and still have in front of them the possibility of raising legal issues to their case and can't find assistance in a system that's designed for skilled legal advice?
It's a big problem, and the public is unaware that I think that we just don't fund it. And the public thinks that inmates have public defenders accessible to them and at their beck and call, and in fact it's not true. They simply don't, and it's a big problem. And many people spend many years in jail that they shouldn't spend because they just don't have legal counsel.
And this isn't just the opinion of criminal defense lawyers who are sort of outside society's pale, but also of a former federal judge.
I agree. I think there's a tremendous shortfall in the delivery of legal services to people who may not necessarily be innocent, but who have been sentenced under the wrong statute, who may have received too much time for the crime that they received, may not know how, whether you're in the federal or state system, how to process appeals. And I think that there's a tremendous gap in legal representation.
I'd like to give you an example of something they're talking about.
If you can give it to us quickly, that'd be great.
I had an individual that was incarcerated with me that had some warrants for child support. And what happened was he had paid the child support, but administratively paperwork had got lost and so on. So he got arrested and he was eventually locked up. Well, come to find out that he had receipts for the paperwork. And it came down to me calling his mother and his mother going down and turning these receipts over, and he was released based on the fact that he had been paying the child support, but just they had lost the paperwork.
Well, this sounds like a gap in the system. How do judges and others on the bench, where do we start in attacking this? Because there isn't, like, as far as I know, a mass movement to find more resources to have appellate lawyers for people incarcerated.
Well, I think judges play a role in eliciting, actually recruiting members of the bar to handle cases on a pro bono basis.
But why isn't there a system in which people who have remedies available and no resources have appointed counsel paid for by the state? Why don't we have a system like that?
Well,
wouldn't that be
a just result? Well, of course it would. We do have to a certain extent. I think we have more available in the federal system than we do in many state court systems. But there's no question there's a tremendous gap here, and something needs to be done. And pro bono work on the part of the bar is an important aspect of that. I think judges have to remain vigilant, and where they see a meritorious claim, even though it may not necessarily carry the day, it may be something they want to consider finding a lawyer for that particular inmate.
Optimistic or not, that through the legislature or some other institutional resource, there'll be a movement at any time in our lifetimes to effectively fund appellate resources for men and women in prison.
One would hope the legislators would wake up to all the DNA exonerations and look at the problem.
Do you see any sign of this awakening?
No, I don't
taking
see any
place?
sign of
Okay.
it.
That means
any movement to help people that are incarcerated. And
David, optimistic or no?
No.
Okay. Well, we've got to leave it there. Our thanks to Paul Castellero, to David Shepard, to Judge Stephen Orlovsky for joining us here on Due Process. Remember, we'll be back here next week with more law and justice issues that you won't find anywhere else. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
I think they're legion. I think they're in every prison. I think they're in the prison law libraries. You see federal judges writing opinions, complaining about them, because they're filing cases not just in the criminal law area, but they're filing cases on conditions, right, under the civil rights statutes, 42 U.S.C. 1983, the federal statute. They're fighting for humane conditions of imprisonment. They're saying we're human. That's a good thing to say. It's a good phenomenon.
For most of them, it starts with working on their own cases?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. With working on their own cases. For some of them, it's a way of establishing a role in the prison pecking order so that they can survive. You know, if someone has a brain and can write a good pro se brief, that's someone that maybe is not going to take a beating when someone else might, or might not be victimized. Prisons are rough places. Prisoners are, although they're human, they're dehumanized by prison conditions. And so it's a way of surviving for someone.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, a private foundation focusing on New Jersey public policy issues. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.